I always thought the worst sound in the world was my alarm clock. But I was wrong. It was Darren's voice, echoing through the kitchen at 6 in the morning, tearing into me before I'd even had time to breathe. I remember standing there, half awake, holding a chipped mug of coffee while he listed every one of my supposed failures like he was reading a grocery list. My mom, Melissa, hovered near the stove, pretending to stir eggs that were long since done, her shoulders tight with guilt she never dared voice aloud. I used to think things would get better when I turned 18, that adulthood would grant me some kind of protection, but living with Darren meant every day felt like stepping into a battlefield I never signed up for. And that morning, when he told me to start packing, his words hit harder than anything he'd ever thrown my way. I set my mug down, trying not to let my hands shake, but Darren noticed anyway. He always noticed. He smirked, leaning back in his chair like a king in his castle, and said he was tired of freeloaders taking up space in his home. My mom flinched, opening her mouth to say something, but one sharp look from Darren made her shrink back into silence. I hated the way she folded under him, hated that she didn't deserve the suffocating marriage she lived in, and hated that I couldn't save either of us from the mess. Darren tapped his fingers on the table, savoring the control, and told me I had 30 days to get out, the sooner the better. I wanted to argue, to tell him I paid for my own tuition, my own food, my own gas, and that the only reason I was stuck in that house was because I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and finishing my last semester of college. But Darren didn't care about facts. He cared about power. He liked having someone to belittle, someone to hover over like a storm cloud waiting for the next thunderous strike. And my mom, still trapped in the memory of the man she first fell in love with, couldn't see how much he'd twisted over the years. Later that afternoon, when he left for his shift, my mom quietly approached me in the hallway, wringing her hands the way she always did when she felt cornered. She whispered an apology that trembled at the edges, telling me she didn't mean for any of this to happen. I could see tears building in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt guilty for being angry with her. But the more she talked, the more the truth settled in. She was scared of him. Not physically, but emotionally, completely trapped by his temper and smooth-talking manipulation. When she told me she'd try to talk to him, I knew nothing would change. I escaped the house as soon as I could, dialing my best friend, Mara, while walking to the bus stop with the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Mara didn't even say hello. She just listened as I vented, her breathing steady on the other end of the line like she'd been waiting for this call. She had never liked Darren and didn't hide it. "You need legal advice," she said firmly, cutting through my anger with calm logic. The idea startled me because I'd never considered lawyers or legal rights. Those were grown-up tools, reserved for people with connections and confidence, not people like me, who were barely keeping their life glued together. When I told Mara I had no money for a lawyer, she reminded me her cousin, Priya, worked at a local legal aid clinic that offered free consultations. The possibility flickered like a tiny spark inside me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to hope. I agreed to go, even though it felt surreal walking into that kind of world, like stepping onto a stage set for someone braver. Mara promised to come with me, and that promise alone helped settle the anxiety twisting inside my gut. As the bus rattled down the road, I tried to imagine what I would even say at a legal meeting, but the words refused to form. When I returned home that evening, the house felt heavier than usual, like Darren's presence lingered in the air even though he wasn't there. I walked past the garage and noticed the new padlock he'd installed on the door, not the one we'd always used, but a heavy-duty one I didn't have a key for. It didn't take long to guess what was behind it. My father's belongings. The ones Darren always complained were cluttering the place, even though they were the last pieces of my dad I had left. A knot formed in my throat as I stared at the lock, realizing Darren was cutting me out not just from the house, but from my own history. Later that night, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling while the house hummed with tense, heavy quiet. The 30-day deadline weighed on me like a countdown I couldn't stop. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight, couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was happening beneath the surface. And when my phone lit up with a new message, Mara sending the lawyer's appointment time for the next morning, I felt a shift inside me. This wasn't just about leaving the house anymore. It was about finding out why Darren was so desperate to make me disappear. The next morning, Mara met me outside the legal aid clinic, her hair pulled into a messy bun and a look of fierce determination written across her face. I was grateful for her presence because my stomach twisted itself into knots the moment I stepped through the glass doors. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper, and the air buzzed with quiet urgency people waiting for help, holding folders like lifelines. When a receptionist called my name, I felt my heartbeat stutter, but Mara gave me a reassuring nod that grounded me. Together, we followed her down a narrow hallway to a small office, where a woman with warm eyes and a sharp posture stood to greet us. "Hi, Avery. I'm Priya," she said, her voice calm and professional, offering her hand. I shook it, trying not to let her see how nervous I was. She motioned for us to sit across from her desk, which was tidy except for a stack of thick case files arranged in immaculate order. "Mara filled me in on the basics," she continued, folding her hands. "But I need to hear it from you. Tell me everything." I exhaled slowly and started from the beginning. Darren's insults, the sudden eviction threat, the new lock on the garage, and the way my mother seemed trapped in the middle. Priya listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful and focused. When I finished, she leaned back slightly in her chair, tapping a pen against her notebook. "Okay," she said. "First things first. Darren has no legal authority to evict you unless his name is on the deed or lease." Her words hit me like a jolt. "Is it?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't think so," I said, suddenly unsure. "The house belonged to my dad. My mom moved in when they married, and after he passed, she stayed. But I don't know who it legally belongs to now." Priya raised an eyebrow, the kind of expression that suggested the gears in her mind had started turning hard. "If the property was never officially transferred, things get more complicated," she explained, "and more interesting." Mara shot me a look that said, "See? I told you something was off." I swallowed, feeling my pulse quicken as Priya continued. "Do you have access to any documents from when your father owned the house? Deeds, wills, insurance paperwork, anything like that?" I hesitated before nodding. "Some. They're in the garage. Or they were. That's why Darren locked it." Priya gave a knowing sigh, the kind lawyers give when something smells exactly like trouble. Before we left, she handed me a checklist of documents she needed and told me to come back as soon as I gathered everything. Walking out of the clinic, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because someone finally believed me, and heavier because I sensed the storm brewing behind Darren's smug facade. Mara looped her arm through mine as we walked toward the bus stop. "We're going to figure this out," she said confidently. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when I got home, Darren's car was already in the driveway, and the front door was cracked open like he'd been waiting for me. The moment I stepped inside, he appeared at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, face tight with irritation. "Where have you been?" he demanded, as though I owed him an hourly report of my whereabouts. My mind raced for a believable excuse, but before I could answer, he noticed the folder I was clutching, the one Priya had given me. His eyes narrowed with sharp suspicion. He stepped closer, towering over me, and plucked the folder from my hands without asking. "What's this?" he snapped, flipping it open and scanning the contents. When he saw the legal clinic header on the papers, his face darkened with a fury I'd never seen before. "You think you can go behind my back?" he said, voice low and venomous. "You think you have rights in my house?" Before I could protest, he tore one of the pages in half, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like broken feathers. My mom rushed in from the kitchen, alarmed by the raised voices. "Darren, stop," she pleaded, trying to place herself between us. But Darren brushed her aside with a dismissive flick of his hand, never taking his eyes off me. "You're done here," he said coldly. "No 30 days. You're out by the end of the week." My chest tightened, and for a moment I felt like I couldn't breathe. My mom gasped, shaking her head. "Darren, you can't." But he cut her off with a shout loud enough to make her flinch. I forced myself to stand straighter, fueled by a spark of defiance I hadn't felt before. "You don't own this house," I said, my voice trembling but determined. Darren laughed, a cruel, mocking sound, that filled the room like smoke. "I own everything in this place," he spat. "Your room, your clothes, even that junk in the garage. All of it is mine now." His words punched straight into my stomach, knocking the air out of me. And as I stared at him, something shifted inside me, something sharp and urgent. That night, after Darren went to bed, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Priya. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of disbelief that made my skin prickle. "Avery," she said, "I looked into preliminary records, and your stepdad, he made a very stupid mistake." Priya's voice lingered in my mind long after I hung up the phone, echoing through the dark, silent bedroom like a warning and a promise at the same time. She hadn't gone into detail, only enough to tell me that something about the property records didn't line up with what Darren believed. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat, trying to imagine what a very stupid mistake could mean. Every creak the house made felt heavier, loaded with secrets buried beneath the floorboards or tucked away in forgotten drawers. At some point, exhaustion finally dragged me under, but even then, my dreams were fractured by images of shredded paperwork and Darren's triumphant sneer. The next morning, I slipped out of the house before anyone else was awake, determined to get those documents from the garage, no matter what locks Darren tried to put between me and the truth. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, and the sky held that dim, bluish glow right before sunrise, quiet enough to feel like the world was holding its breath for me. Approaching the garage door, I saw the new padlock thick, shiny, and very much closed, but I also noticed something Darren clearly hadn't considered: the side window he always forgot to latch. I hesitated only a second before sliding my fingers under the frame and pushing upward. It groaned, but after a firm tug, it lifted, just enough for me to slip inside. The garage smelled like dust, cardboard, and old motor oil, the kind of scent that triggers memories whether you want them or not. My father used to work on his motorcycle in here, the radio always playing some old rock station as he hummed along off-key. Standing in that dim, dusty space, I felt a wave of grief collide with anger, fueling me as I searched through the boxes Darren had shoved into a chaotic pile. Finally, in a plastic bin labeled Dad, Estate, I found what I needed: a worn folder filled with property deeds, bank statements, and a copy of my father's will, all neatly organized in his careful handwriting. My hands shook as I tucked everything into my backpack, double-checking that I didn't leave anything behind. But just as I was about to climb back out through the window, I heard a voice behind me that iced my blood. "Well, well, well," Darren drawled, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "Look at you, breaking and entering like a little criminal." My stomach dropped so fast it felt like it hit the floor. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind raced, trying to figure out how long he'd been watching, how much he'd seen, whether he'd noticed the folder in my backpack. I straightened slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears, and forced my face into something close to neutral. Darren stepped further into the garage, the overhead light flickering ominously as he approached. "You think you're smart," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "but you have no idea what you're dealing with. This house, this property, it's mine by marriage. You're nothing but baggage I never agreed to." His words hit hard, not because they were true, but because he believed them so deeply. He really thought he had already won, that I was too scared or too powerless to challenge him. But standing there with the weight of my father's documents in my backpack, something inside me hardened. Before Darren could get closer, my mother's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Darren? What's going on?" she called from the hallway, her footsteps approaching fast. He cursed under his breath and stepped away from me, plastering on a fake, irritated expression as she appeared in the doorway. "Your kid," he snapped, pointing at me, "was snooping around where she doesn't belong." My mother's eyes flicked from him to me. Searching my face, I saw the worry, the confusion, and the exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes. But beneath it all, I also saw fear. Fear of upsetting him, fear of losing stability, fear of conflict. I walked past them both, clutching my backpack, and my mom didn't stop me. She just stood there, torn between us, while Darren glared at the back of my head like he was drilling holes into my skull. Once outside, I didn't stop walking until I reached the bus stop at the edge of our neighborhood. The moment I sat down, my phone buzzed with a text from Priya. Can you come in today? I've connected some dots. It's important. My breath caught. Her words confirmed what I already sensed. The documents in my bag were more than old papers. They were leverage. When I got to the legal clinic, Priya ushered me into her office with an urgency I hadn't seen before. Did you bring the documents? She asked, and I nodded, handing her the folder. She skimmed through the pages, her eyes widening, her mouth curving into a slow, almost disbelieving smile. Then she looked up at me, her expression electric with triumph. Avery, she said, tapping the will with her pen. Your father left the house to you. Not your mother, and definitely not Darren. My breath left my lungs in a rush, like someone had punched me. But Priya wasn't done. She opened another document I hadn't even noticed earlier and slid it toward me. And here's the part Darren doesn't know, she said. He's been collecting rental income illegally. And that, my dear, is a felony. Priya waited for my reaction, but I could barely form a coherent thought as the weight of her revelation settled over me. My father had left the house to me, not my mother. Not to be shared, not to be interpreted. It was mine, legally and unequivocally, tucked inside a folder that Darren had tried to bury under dust and lock behind a door he didn't even own. My mind raced through every argument he'd started, every threat he'd made, every time he'd told me I didn't belong in the house my father built with his own hands. The understanding washed over me slowly, like warm water seeping into frozen skin. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something dangerously close to power. Priya leaned forward, her elbows resting on her desk. There's more, she said, flipping to a printed set of bank statements. This is the rental income. Your father owned a small commercial garage downtown, and he leased part of it to a mechanic. Rent still gets paid every month. Legally, that income should have gone to you. She tapped the page again. But your stepdad intercepted it. He's been pocketing the money and claiming the property belongs to him through your mother. My chest tightened in a mixture of shock and rage. Darren had been stealing from me my father's income while calling me a burden. Isn't this, criminal? I asked, my voice unsteady. Priya nodded with a solemn expression. Very, which means we have options. She launched into a series of explanations: civil action, property reclamation, restitution demands, filing charges, but it all blurred together as my mind replayed Darren's insults like a broken record. Every contemptuous comment he'd thrown my way now felt different, recontextualized under the glaring truth that he needed me to stay ignorant. I realized that his cruelty wasn't just personal, it was strategic. He'd tried to break me so I wouldn't question him. Priya must have sensed the storm gathering behind my silence because she softened her tone. Take the night to think, she said. But whatever you decide, you're not alone. I nodded slowly, gripping the folder like it was armor. Walking out of the clinic, the world felt different, sharper somehow, like the air itself had teeth. I wasn't just fighting for dignity anymore. I was fighting for what was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt capable of doing it. When I got home, I found my mother at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of cold tea. Her eyes flicked up when she saw me, and relief briefly crossed her face before guilt swallowed it. Avery, she whispered, I'm sorry about earlier. Darren said you were acting out, and I didn't know what to do. Her voice trembled with strain. I wanted to be angry at her, but she looked so tired, so worn down by years of compromises, that my anger softened into something else, something sadder. She wasn't complicit. She was trapped. Before I could reassure her, Darren stormed into the kitchen, keys jingling in his hand. Where have you been? He barked, glaring at me as if the question were an accusation. His face was red, his jaw tight, and he smelled faintly of beer despite it being early evening. He'd been waiting for me, agitated. The same way a dog waits at a window for a threat it isn't smart enough to identify. I stood straighter, the folder pressed under my arm. I went to the legal clinic, I said evenly. The words hung in the air like a lit fuse. Darren scoffed, stepping closer. Still playing lawyer games? You really think someone's going to help you? You're nothing without this house, and you know it. His voice was sharp, slicing through the room. My mother flinched, placing a hand against the table to steady herself. I could feel my pulse in my palms, in my throat, everywhere. but I refused to step back. "You're right," I said quietly. "This house matters." I pulled the folder forward so he could see it. "Good thing it doesn't belong to you." Darren's expression twisted, confusion flickering into fear before he masked it with anger. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. I held the will up, meeting his eyes with a steadiness I didn't know I possessed. "My father left the house to me. Everything you've been claiming, everything you've been threatening, it's all illegal." Silence fell so heavy, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Darren's face drained of color, his overconfidence evaporating as quickly as vapor on glass. He opened his mouth to argue, but my mother cut him off with a whisper that cracked like thin ice. Is that true?" Her eyes darted between the will and Darren, searching for a lie, a contradiction, anything that would make the world feel stable again. But Darren said nothing. His jaw clenched, and he looked away. I could feel the shift happen, the balance of power tilting. But I wasn't finished. "And that's not all," I said. "Priya found the rental income you've been stealing." Darren's head snapped up, panic finally breaking through his facade. He took a step back, then another, as though distance could undo the truth. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears welling in her eyes as realization hit her. The man she trusted, the man who claimed I was the problem, had been lying to her for years. The room trembled with the weight of what came next. The silence that filled the kitchen felt like a living thing, pressing against the walls and crowding the air between the three of us. Darren's eyes darted from me to my mother like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. But even he seemed to understand there was nowhere left to run. My mother's fingers trembled as she lowered her hands from her mouth, her face pale with betrayal. She whispered his name. "Darren?" As if hoping he would deny everything. But he wouldn't meet her gaze. The man who'd spent years bullying me suddenly looked small, fragile even, stripped of the control he had clung to so tightly. I pulled out a chair and sat, deliberately slow, grounding myself before I said something reckless. "I'm giving you a chance," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "You can admit what you did, hand over the rental income statements, and leave peacefully, or we do this the legal way." Darren scoffed, but the sound cracked halfway through, betrayed by fear. "You're bluffing," he said, but it lacked conviction. I opened the folder and slid the will toward him, the legal clinic's letterhead visible at the top of the page. He stared down at it like it was a ticking bomb. My mother stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You told me you handled everything," she said, each word heavy with disbelief. "You told me it was all settled years ago." Darren bristled, finally snapping his head up at her. "Well, maybe if your kid wasn't nosy." She cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. "Do not blame her," she said, her tone strong for the first time in months. The shift stunned both of us, and even Darren seemed momentarily thrown. She backed away from him, leaning on the counter as though steadying herself against the cold truth that had unraveled her entire marriage in a matter of minutes. I stood again and gathered the documents. "I'm heading to Priya's office," I said. "She's filing the paperwork. I just wanted to give you a chance to leave without making this messier." Darren's lip curled in defiance, but his eyes flicked nervously between me and the folder. I could almost see the moment the reality sank in that he had no legal claim, no ownership, no leverage, just lies and stolen money. "You can't kick me out," he muttered weakly. "Your mother." My mom closed her eyes, pain twisting her face. "I'll be staying with my sister for now," she said softly. "You need to go." The tremor in Darren's hands grew more noticeable as the situation slipped further out of his grasp. He inhaled sharply, his anger flaring again as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "This isn't over," he snapped. But the threat lacked its usual bite. He stormed out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving my mother and me in a brittle silence. She turned toward me, eyes shining with tears. But before she could say anything, I stepped forward and hugged her. It wasn't a warm reunion, it was two exhausted people holding on to each other because everything else was falling apart. Later that afternoon, I sat in Priya's office again, while she assembled the final stack of paperwork, with the precision of someone who not only knew the law, but loved wielding it against people like Darren. "This will protect you," she said, sliding a copy toward me. And once this is filed, he can't come within 100 feet of the property without violating the order. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight in my chest lighten just a bit. The documents were more than legal protection, they were validation. Proof that Darren's cruelty wasn't authority, and his intimidation wasn't truth. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a flurry of messages from my mother. She had gone home to gather her things, but what she found was something even she wasn't prepared for. Darren had packed his bags in a rage and left immediately, not silently, but explosively, destroying half the living room on his way out. Lamps overturned, cushions ripped open, framed photos shattered on the floor. It was his final tantrum, a pathetic attempt at regaining control he never had. But the most important part? He was gone. I returned home to help my mom clean, and for the first time in ages, the house felt like it could breathe again. Even with the mess scattered everywhere, the air was lighter, free from the oppressive weight Darren carried with him. My mother apologized over and over, tears slipping down her face as she explained how blinded she'd been by the need for stability. I told her we'd figure it out together, and I meant it. For the first time since my father passed, I felt connected to this house not just by blood, but by choice. A week later, the rental tenant delivered a cashier's check for the back payments Darren had been collecting, along with a note apologizing for the confusion. Priya had handled everything quickly, and the tenant was more than relieved to know the property now had a rightful, responsible owner. Holding that check in my hand, I felt something shift inside me, not greed, not victory, but pride. My father had left me more than a house. He'd left me the means to stand on my own. But the true moment of justice came when Priya called with one final update. "Thought you'd like to know," she said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Darren's facing charges for fraud. The DA is taking it seriously." I closed my eyes as a slow, steady relief washed over me. The kind that seeps into your bones and settles quietly. For the first time in years, someone who hurt me was finally being held accountable.